Well, as you might know, if you've been with us at all, we're working through Ephesians 6 rather slowly here as we come to the end of Ephesians, wanting to highlight the gospel in Ephesians 6. So today for our text, we're focusing on the first two verses, but let me read verses 15 through 20 for context for us. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying at all times in the Spirit with all prayer and supplication. To that end, keep alert with all perseverance, making supplication for all the saints, and also for me, that words may be given to me in opening my mouth boldly to proclaim the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may declare it boldly, as I ought to speak. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that it leads us. It teaches us we do not and cannot know otherwise. So use your word today to direct our hearts and minds to you, to the gospel, and to what you have to say to us. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, there are many factors in making armies successful in going out to war and defeating someone else in battle. Things like the number of troops, the quality of their training, their strategy and tactics, the logistics and supply ability, who holds the better ground on the field, what technological advances is available to each army, the moral and psychological factors, how quickly the armies can move. There are endless number of factors that lead into who wins a battle. And generals are always looking for what advantages they have that they can employ and how they can use those against the weaknesses of the enemy to give them the greatest chance of winning the battle. However, as we think about spiritual warfare, these are not exactly the calculations that we have to make as Christians. Historians thinking about World War II often love to debate what could have or might have happened, but most agree that the Allied victory at Normandy on D-Day, when the Allies invaded northern France and got a foothold on the beaches of Normandy to begin to take back Europe from Germany, most historians would say that that was the decisive moment in the European war, that once Normandy happened, once D-Day happened, all the factors were in favor for the Allies to push to Berlin and end the war in Europe. That the decisive moment ultimately guaranteed their victory. And that's a decent analogy for where we are as Christians as we think about spiritual warfare. That the decisive victory of Jesus in his death and resurrection means that we're on the winning side. That the victory has been accomplished, and we need to reckon with the fact that we're on the winning side while continuing to fight. And we need to fight with the strength that God gives us. We need to fight in the way that God has designed, which means fighting by the gospel. As we're finishing up the book of Ephesians here, and in Ephesians 6, we're trying to show you with this extended series on the armor of God, that really the armor of God is simply a metaphor for how we live out the gospel. That we're standing firm in the gospel against all the ways that would distract us from obedience and lead us into disobedience from God. So far we've looked at the belt of truth and the gospel shoes 2 weeks ago. Last week, Jordan looked at the breastplate of righteousness. Today, I'm going to talk about the shield of faith and the helmet of salvation. And then next week, Jordan will finish our series by looking at the sword of the Spirit and the rest of the passage. So we have two pieces of armor today, and thus two main points. As we talk about the shield of faith, the first point is that you need to take up your faith. Now, here in this paragraph, Paul is giving extra prominence to the role of the shield of faith. He says in all circumstances, the Christian needs to take up the shield of faith. So let's talk about this shield metaphor. The shield was terribly important to the Roman legions. It was a defensive weapon. It was a team weapon. It was even occasionally an offensive weapon. The shields at this time in the Roman world would have been quite large, about 4 feet tall by 2.5 feet wide. They would have been generally rectangular, though slightly curved on the edges to back towards the person holding it, so that there's primarily defenses on the front, but also it provides some shielding on the side as well. The shield would have been made of several layers of thin wood, and the grain of the wood would have been placed perpendicular to the layer before it. And so basically it's a large piece of plywood, slightly curved and glued together. Then it would have been covered with leather or felt, and then the edges would have been bound with metal. In the middle of the shield, there would have been what's called a metal boss, a usually conical piece of metal on the outside of the shield, which would have been on the reverse side of where the handle is. So it's providing extra protection for your hand so that nothing could get through the shield at all at that point. And further, when necessary, that metal boss on the outside of the shield could allow the legionary to use the shield as an offensive weapon to punch at his enemies. Now, given the size and shape of the shield, it would have been the most important piece of equipment for a Roman soldier, providing protection from projectile attacks through the air, as well as from melee weapons like axes, clubs, and swords in hand-to-hand combat. Now, Paul, in using the metaphor, gives particular attention to one use of the shield. Notice he says that the shield of faith is important for extinguishing the fiery darts of the evil one. Now, in the warfare of their day, there would have been lots of dangerous things flying through the air: rocks, javelins, spears of various kinds, weighted metal darts, and of course, arrows. To add to the terror and destruction, some of these projectile weapons could be set on fire before they were shot at the enemy, causing all sorts of difficulty. Now, we have said several times in the series that one of the ways the devil attacks us is by lying to us, by convincing us of things that aren't true. Sometimes he convinces us that we're better than we are, and thus we deserve whatever sin we want to fall into. And that's what we would call tempting us. And other times the devil lies to us by accusing us, by saying that we're so terrible and shameful and worthless that it doesn't really matter what we do, whether it's sinning or wallowing in our awfulness, whichever sounds good to us. So to counter these attacks is to take up the shield of faith, Paul says. Now think if you're in a battle situation and all of a sudden arrows start flying in your direction. The only thing that makes sense is to pick up this shield, to get behind it, and to take cover. Again, the size and shape of the shield would have been sufficient to cover almost your entire body, particularly if you were squatting behind it. Now, you can easily picture Captain America with his round vibranium shield deflecting bullets as people come at him, and his shield is about 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. Now, if you extend that shield and make it taller and rectangular, 4 feet by 2.5 feet, it's easy to see why you would want to hide behind this. It's really hard to imagine in a combat situation, arrows dropping around you, hitting your fellow combatants, and you just standing there thinking, oh man, the arrows are coming, whatever shall I do? No, of course not. It's also hard to think, well, I'm just going to dodge the arrows, or I'm going to swat at them. When those arrows come raining down pain and destruction on your troops, the only thing to do is to grab the shield. So Paul's saying, the only thing to do when we're being attacked spiritually is to take up our faith and properly employ it, to hide behind it. Now, that's a metaphor, but spiritually speaking, what does this really mean for us? How do we take up our faith? Now, as I said 2 weeks ago, many of these elements of the armor have both an objective and a subjective element to them. There's something outside of us being discussed, and then something also about what we do. So in this case, when we talk about the shield of faith, initially we're talking about God, God's faithfulness to us. God is faithfully protecting us. God is faithful to his own character, meaning he's always all of who he is. He's not changeable. He's always completely full of truth, power, goodness, holiness, mercy. He's all of who he is all at the same time. Also, God is faithful to love us despite the fact that we often ignore him and live independently from him. And finally, God faithfully executes redemption for us in history and in time, with the center of that redemption being the life, the person, the work of Jesus Christ. So, God, by who he is and by what he does, is fully faithful, and then he offers the results of that faithfulness to us. So because of God's faithfulness, we can then have faith in him. We see that he's trustworthy, and we can entrust ourselves to him. Faith then is not about working up enough power to believe. Now, there's a popular comment that you see in all sorts of ways in our culture that you just gotta believe, and we use it as a shorthand for the way out of all sorts of difficulties. Well, you just gotta believe. In that scenario, faith works kind of like pixie dust. If you have enough of it, if you believe enough, then maybe you'll be able to fly away. Now, biblical faith is nothing like this, of course. We defined it earlier in our confession this way: faith in Jesus Christ is a saving grace, whereby we receive and rest upon Him alone for salvation, as He is offered to us in the gospel. So faith for the Christian is first about the object of faith. It's not just that you've got to believe, it's that you've got to believe in Jesus. You've got to believe in someone utterly trustworthy, not in yourself, not in something, not in anything, but in the only one who can save you. Properly placed faith can save. And Jesus then is offered to us, the one we're told to have faith in, as the perfect image of God. He offers to remake us in that image, to save us from our sin and reconnect us with God. The definition also says that faith is a saving grace. So faith saves us, but not because of anything we've done. It's a grace that we even believe, that in the wonderful mystery of how God works, His work allows us to believe in ways that we can't fully understand. And finally, it says faith is receiving or resting on Jesus. In this sense, then, our faith is the opposite of making lots of effort. It's the opposite of doing good works on our part, because, in fact, Jesus has done the work. Jesus lived a perfect, obedient life. Jesus died a sacrificial, substitutionary death, and Jesus was resurrected from the dead, thereby showing He has power over sin and death and evil. He's the Lord of all things, and He can offer to us eternal life. So when we say we're having faith, we're saying we're putting all our chips in on Jesus. We're putting ourselves again in His hands. We're not trusting in ourselves, nor are we even trusting in our ability to believe enough or have a strong enough faith. Jesus tells a story at one point that faith is like a mustard seed, which is a very tiny seed. And He says faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. What He means is that faith, no matter how strong or weak your faith feels, faith ultimately is an exercise in dependence. We're entrusting ourselves to Jesus, even though we have sin and doubt and confusion. But given who Jesus is and what He has done, it makes sense to trust Him. Now, sometimes it's helpful to define the opposite of our terms. The opposite of faith is unbelief. In our unbelief, we think that we've got better info somewhere else other than Jesus, or we're wise enough on our own to figure out how life should be, or that we're strong enough to deliver ourselves from all of our difficulties. In this unbelief, then, we totally buy into the narrative that we hear all day long, that life ultimately, the greatest truth is found in yourself. Life is about being authentic and true to yourself. And in the end, only you can choose what makes you happy. No one else can choose for you. Certainly no other person, but not even God. No religion can tell you the way you need to live. You need to figure out your truth and choose it. And of course, if there is a God, which who really knows if there is, this is the narrative, then certainly He just wants whatever it is that you want for yourself. You being true to yourself is exactly what God wants. So this narrative in our culture that the greatest truth is my truth and my authenticity, this actually lines up very well with classic definitions of sin and rebellion. That we're ultimately independent from God, and whatever benefit might or might not exist in the gospel, it largely is about helping me live my best life, of me doing what I want to do. Faith in Jesus, on the other hand, is seeing how bankrupt life on our own actually is. And it's moving away from independence from God and learning about dependence for Him. It's about leaning on the powerful, gracious, loving God and leaning into whatever He has designed for us, even when it doesn't feel like my most authentic self. It's actually in that sense of dependence where true and eternal joy and freedom are found. And that's what it means to take up the shield of faith. Now, one other angle I want to highlight about the shield of faith is the group dynamic. We've said many times over the years that Christianity is a team sport. We saw 2 weeks ago that in this passage, the verbs are plural. They're not singular. And that's the case with today's passage. This doesn't erase individual implications. It simply emphasizes the corporate or community applications. So you got to think about how this works. So our faith is what unites us. It's not simply me and Jesus. It's the fact that as I believe in Jesus, I'm connected to the church. When you meet a believer from another culture, maybe someone who doesn't speak any of the same language as you, their life experience is entirely different. Maybe she is a subsistence farmer and you are a banker in South Charlotte. You have nothing in common, it seems, except the most important things, that you're made in the image of God, and even more than that your image of God is being redeemed and renewed because of Jesus. You have faith in the Lord of the universe. So Paul says there's one Lord, one faith, one baptism, and that connects us to one another in the church universal. Also, functionally, we're designed to live life together, to protect one another by faith. Now, Roman legions, in moments when they're under a heavy projectile attack of some kind, missiles, arrows, artillery, whatever was coming through the air, could form a formation called the testudo, which was Latin for tortoise. And what would happen is the front line would all hold their shields to the front, but then the ranks behind, the lines of soldiers behind the front line, would hold the shields right here above their heads. And these large, long shields would create a shell and a roof, so that anything flying through the air would naturally bounce off this newly formed tortoise shell on the battlefield. And oftentimes what would happen then is that you're protecting one another by everyone holding their shields in the right place. The whole group is protected. Anyone who didn't have a shield, or maybe had already been injured, could be gathered to the center of the formation under all the shields and be protected. When I personally am weak, when I'm wavering, when I'm confused, when I cannot see clearly what God is doing, it's almost always another believer, their faith, their trust, the clarity of their communication to me that helps to see me through. Dietrich Bonhoeffer famously talks about this in his book, Life Together, that God has designed it this way, that He's designed us to need one another, and particularly He's designed us to need to hear the Word of God from each other, because He says that when other people speak to us in our weaknesses, the Christ in your own heart is weaker than the Christ in the word of your brother. That your own heart is uncertain, but your brother or sister's word is so sure. You know, when we speak to each other, to other believers, we are bringing words of life, words of salvation, words of hope. And when you can't lift your own shield, when you simply can't see clearly, you're not trusting, you're dazed, you're wounded, the community of the church is designed to defend you, to cover you, to shield you, to believe for you what you can't believe right now. In many situations where someone is just in despair, I've said or heard other people say, that's okay, I understand your circumstances are awful. It's understandable that at the moment you can't believe and you can't trust Jesus, but we can see that Jesus is at work. We can trust Him, and we will pray, and we will, in a sense, cover you with our shield of faith, even though you currently are too weak and too dazed to hold on to it yourself. We speak words to one another that refresh our faith, and we realize, again, we're not dependent on our ability to feel it, but we're actually dependent primarily on Jesus' ability to defend us, Jesus' ability to apply His victory to us. So we take up the shield of faith. In a similar way, we're told to take hold of our salvation, which is our second point. Look at verse 17, where we are told to take hold of our salvation. Now, the ESV, our translation, says to take the helmet of salvation. The word here for take indicates receiving or using something that's been given to you, not something that you have to find or make yourself. It's something that's been granted to you. And so you accept it. You welcome it. You take hold of it. So that's what we're going to say. You need to take hold again of your salvation. Now, the spiritual language here comes from Isaiah 59:17. God Himself, it says, puts on righteousness as a breastplate and a helmet of salvation. Now, when you think about God, clearly he doesn't need to be saved, but rather it's his ability to offer salvation to us, his victory over the forces of sin and evil and death and suffering. He can deliver us from them. So the language from Isaiah is helping us picture God as our warrior. God is the one who has already won the victory for us and now is applying it to us. Now, salvation, sometimes pictured as rescue in the Bible, salvation in the New Testament is something already accomplished for us in the work of Jesus via his death and resurrection. It's something that's being applied currently in our reality right now, and it has a future aspect that there will be a full final deliverance to come. Now, 1 Thessalonians 5:8 holds some of these elements together. He says we should be sober, Paul says, having put on the breastplate of faith and love. See, having already done it, that's a completed action. And for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's the future coming reality. So even Paul talks about salvation as something past, present, and future, but in the book of Ephesians, which is our context, he primarily talks about something that's already true of you. It's already accomplished. He says in chapter 2, right, it's by grace that you have been saved. Jesus has already given it to us. It's already true of us. And that's what protects us as we fight against all the things that would distract us, discourage us, defeat us, and lead us into disobedience. Salvation then is by grace. It's all of God's work. We didn't do anything, but it's through faith. Faith is the instrument, so to speak, that tethers us to him. It's by faith, by trusting him, that we access God. We rely on his work, we believe his promises, and we remain securely connected to him. So one root of possible spiritual warfare here is unnecessary and unhealthy doubts about your salvation. I mentioned this last time, that sometimes we can get so introspective in looking at ourselves that we see our sin and we doubt our salvation instead of looking at Jesus where our hope lies. The New Testament wants us to look to Jesus and have great assurance of our faith. Now, at the same time, the New Testament warns us that we shouldn't be falsely presumptuous. We shouldn't assume we are saved simply because we prayed a prayer sometime, or because I attend church, or I take the sacraments, but I have a cold heart towards God and my life is increasingly running from him. The Bible warns us that if we continue down that path, we may actually prove that we don't belong to him. So we don't want to assume we're fine if we aren't. That's unhealthy. But it's also very unhealthy to have doubt about your salvation when you are in fact saved. So when you belong to God by faith, you can know that you are safe in him, even as you struggle against your sin. If you believe in Jesus, despite your doubts, your wanderings, your struggles with sin, Luther has a very helpful way to fight back against the fear, the unfounded fear that we don't belong to him. Listen to this long quote. When the devil accuses us and says, "You are a sinner and therefore damned," we should answer, "Because you say I'm a sinner, I will be righteous and saved." "No," says the devil, "you will be damned." And I reply, "No, for I fly to Christ, who gave himself for my sins. Satan, you will not prevail against me when you try to terrify me by setting forth the greatness of my sins and try to bring me into heaviness, distrust, despair, hatred, contempt, and blasphemy against God. On the contrary, when you say I am a sinner, you give me armor and weapons against yourself, so that with your own sword I may cut your throat and tread you under my feet. For Christ died for sinners." As often as you object that I am a sinner, so often you remind me of the benefit of Christ, my Redeemer, on whose shoulders and not on mine lie all my sins. So when you say I am a sinner, you do not terrify me, but comfort me immeasurably. See, in our spiritual warfare, our confidence in God comes as we are reminded continually of our salvation, that all my sin lies on Jesus' shoulders, and not on my own. When I'm reminded that salvation is entirely of God and already achieved for me, I can be absurdly confident in his triumph without being triumphalistic. Triumphalism is the idea that because of the victory of Jesus, we should be living a victorious Christian life, always growing, improving in all ways, not really bothered by problems, that everything's great and we're always getting better. Even when our theology explicitly denies us, I think most American Christians are somewhat prone to this triumphalism, and thus we feel wrongly guilty and thrown out of whack when we struggle, when we hit anxiety or depression, when we have doubts, when we have a struggle with sin. We do want to grow, of course. We want to become more like Jesus. Yes, the New Testament is clear on that. But this most often happens in fits and starts. And it happens usually when we see our sin clearly and turn away from it, not when we gaze at ourselves constantly trying to figure out, am I better than I was last week? Have I grown relative to last month? But when we look away from ourselves and look to the cross, when we see our sins, we see there's nothing we can do. We look to the cross, we see Jesus, and we receive his grace again. Ephesians 6 then is trying to move us in this direction to show us that Jesus loves us, walks with us, and protects us no matter how well we're doing today, so that we live by faith and by grace, not always checking to see if I'm doing okay today, that I'm not performing, nor am I living in fear that I don't belong to him. When I see my sin, my only option is to go to Jesus, to see the Son of God putting himself in my place. And as I see Jesus work for me, it can free me from my sin, from my constant self-focus, and even from my need to be or seem righteous enough. Let that sink in. I am not and cannot be righteous enough. The gospel tells me I'm not supposed to be, that Jesus is righteous in my place and gives me his righteousness. So when I repent of my sins of independence from God, those sins can be the ones where I ignore God's ways entirely and live in a way that almost everyone would agree is not healthy. But it also can be that I'm independently trying to be good enough or righteous enough. And in fact, I'm ignoring the righteousness Jesus gives in the gospel. Paul is wanting to deeply impress upon us that Jesus is victorious over sin and evil and death. And as he gives me his righteousness, I have been saved, I am being saved, and I will be saved. Knowing then that I'm at peace with God allows me to be at war with sin, evil, and disobedience, taking up the shield of faith and taking hold again of our great salvation. We can entrust everything to him without fear of losing it. Not because we never have fear, but because we belong to him. Because Jesus promises to protect his people, and because Jesus wins. And because Jesus wins, we can stand firm with our brothers and sisters in Christ on that solid ground of victory that Jesus gives. Let's pray together. Father, this is good news. We do not want to be ignorant or underplay the reality of spiritual opposition, nor do we want to live in fear. We want to live in the gospel, where we see our sin, we hate our sin, we grieve our sin, and yet when we see it clearly, we turn again to the gospel. We neither live independently of you and doing whatever we want, nor do we live independently of you trying to be independently righteous and prove ourselves enough. We know we are not enough, and we are freed by the reality that Jesus is enough for us, that he has done all the work in living and dying and being raised again, and he now offers to us the opportunity to rest in that work by faith. Father, we thank you for that rest. We thank you for the confidence that gives us that even as our faith grows and shrinks, wavers, moves, our faith is not what saves us, it's Jesus who saves. And faith simply is the instrument by which we are connected to Jesus. Father, we struggle with unbelief. So we do believe in you, but help us with that unbelief. Help us to turn again and again to you and find great encouragement and great confidence in your victory and in what it means. Father, we thank you for these truths, these good gospel truths. Pray that you'll connect them deeply into our hearts and allow us to live in the freedom and the joy that you offer. Father, thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the gospel. Thank you that our faith in salvation can protect us and defend us as we stand firm on the victory you have purchased for us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.